Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the meeting of the Rail North Committee. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Martin Tugwell, Chief Executive of Transport for the North. We're meeting here in Manchester, and thank you to our colleagues in the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for hosting us. Can I just start off with an apology that due to a last-minute diary changes, unfortunately the Mayor himself cannot make this morning's meeting, and he therefore sends his apologies. Now, we do need to go through a process of electing chairs and vice chairs, so we'll do that to start off with in terms of nominations and elections, and then we'll take a view about how we move forward. But if we need to, we will start the meeting and then wait for numbers to be there. Can I start off then by inviting any nominations for the role of Chair of the Rail North Committee?
Yeah, Mayor Scaife from York and North Yorkshire. I nominate Andy Burnham and Suzanne Hinchcliffe to.
And Susan is the Vice Chair.
Vice Chair, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Scaife.
I'll formally second that nomination.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Folks, can I just see from members of the committee, are they content with those two nominations for the Chair and Majority Vice Chair? I would just say there's also the Minority Vice Chair role, which needs to be. I'm looking at Councillor Swarbrick as the Minority Vice Chair on the main board. Councillor Swarbrick, is there anybody there that you want to nominate at this point, or is that something for us to come back to?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Aronimo, sitting to my right.
Are members of the committee content with that?
Like saying this, I'll formally second that then.
Thank you, Councillor Hoops. Are members content with that? Congratulations. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that Councillor Hinchcliffe is on her way and we're expecting her very shortly. So with your indulgence, can I just invite Julie Openshaw, our monitoring officer, just to explain what we'll do next in terms of the meeting.
Chair, I will move the recommendation. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Glenn.
Whatever it meant.
Happy to second that.
Thank you very much, colleagues. So that means that we will continue the meeting. Once Councillor Hinchcliffe arrives, I will invite her to take the chair and take the rest of the meeting. So if you're content, colleagues, we will carry on. There's an opportunity for welcome and apologies, and I know we have a couple of new members around the table. If I might, just as an opportunity, take Mayor Scaife. I know this is your first meeting, isn't it? Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. As of early May, so last 8 or 9 weeks, I'm the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, a brand new combined authority. We are still very much learning, but we're learning at pace. We are excited to be here. Transport in particular is a huge part of what we want to really develop and be involved in York and North Yorkshire. We are a very unique combined authority. In fact, we have a lot of urban, rural and coastal areas, one of the only areas that really has a large part of all three. But we are very much here to learn today, to listen, to take on board as much information as we can, and we'd love in time to be able to reach out to everyone around the table and have further talks and discussions about how we can improve transport in the North West. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Scaife. Councillor Gannon, I know you are regular around the table, but you have a new role in terms of your position here. May I just invite you to explain?
Yes, I'm Martin Gannon, Deputy Leader. Sorry, I'm the Leader of Gateshead Council, and I've just been appointed as the Deputy Mayor for the North East. By way of explanation, I think it was a kind of Hobson's choice. By far the most experienced and skilled person, that's what I'd say.
Right, if we move on with the rest of the agenda, in terms of declarations of interest, are there any additional declarations of interest to make over and above those which you've already done for this meeting, for the items? No? Okay. Then we have the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I first of all take the minutes in terms of for accuracy first, and then we'll come to any matters arising. Are there any matters of accuracy around the minutes of the last meeting? And if not, are members content to approve the minutes? I'm seeing nods around the table, so they are agreed. Can I just check with David? Is there anything that we want to pick up in terms of matters arising? The one I had picked up myself was we talked about network resilience and needing to have a conversation about that, and just maybe explain where we are.
Yeah, we intended to bring a more substantive item on infrastructure to the meeting at the beginning of September, so I think we'll pick that point up there, but we're continuing to talk with train operators and Network Rail around some of these resilience issues, particularly around some of the landslips and so on that had affected parts of the network. So we'll pick that up in more detail in the next meeting of the committee.
Thank you, David. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to raise as matters arising? Okay, in which case we move on to the first substantive item, and I know that this is one that Mayor Burnham, as the chair, has been particularly keen that the committee champions, and I know the rest of the committee members have been doing so likewise, which is about the Rail Accessibility Task and Finish Group. You have the report before you, which summarises where we've got to and starts to look about implementation. Can I just invite David Worsley as the lead for this within the executive just to say anything by way of introduction?
Yes, so this is really just an update on the work of the Accessibility Task and Finish Group. Main reasons we need to update things are because we've now got access to the Accessibility Audit Programme data from Department for Transport, which is a huge amount of new information about what currently exists. 40 million pieces of information about all 2,500 odd stations on the network, so I've now got that for the north. We've been made aware of more types of more high technology facilities enhancement that are available, things using Bluetooth technology and so forth, which could be actually quite low cost, high impact enhancements for people. And we've also got the results of our accessibility survey, which closed on 7th of June coming in. We've got 2,200 responses, and that's giving us more information about what passengers actually want to see in terms of accessibility facilities. So I've updated some of the work. I think the total cost is still in the region of 1.3 billion to do everything that we could possibly want to do. A higher proportion of that, about 387 million, we think is now in what we call quick wins, things that could be done with less disruption, maybe even starting this control period, not having to wait until the next one. And so in the paper I've clarified what we call the maximal scope of everything you might want to do. Now, as we were discussing earlier, actually that things like what the TOCs will do in their own business plans, work that will be done as part of Transpennine route upgrade and so on will have to be deducted from that, which is quite a big task, but that gives you the sort of maximum scope. I've also included some indication of what we think the main risks are to the programme now, uncertainties around costs of dealing with ground conditions and power supplies. Inflation also continues to be a big risk because some aspects of construction costs are inflating more rapidly than in general. And then next steps, I'm bringing all this together in an overarching station strategy document, but perhaps more important, we need to look at potential funding sources. As we were discussing earlier, the Access for All programme has begun allocating its budget for this new control period, and we may want to look at how much of that we can actually use to undertake this work. Is there a case for devolving Access for All funding, and is the North entitled maybe to more than its fair share? At the moment we've got 10 of the 50 stations in Access for All are in the north. You might expect slightly more than that if it was strictly proportional. And I think that when we see the full list, some people will be concerned. Lord McLaughlin was asking earlier about do we have these stations listed in descending order of passenger numbers? Well, looking at that list, actually 4 of the 10 are just in the Merseyrail area, and then there's another, actually the top 4, and then there's another cluster of 3 in Tameside and Stockport. So I think the rest of the north might be wanting to see more of that money as well. So that's where we're up to at the moment.
If I might now hand over to Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you. Apologies for my lateness, but we've been doing a mass transit this morning in West Yorkshire, so I just hot-footed it over here. So thank you very much for that presentation about the accessibility. Obviously, that's quite a big number, isn't it? 1.3 billion, and we've obviously just scraping the surface of that really at the moment. But can I just see anybody indicating wanted to ask any questions? Councillor Swarbrick.
Thank you, Chair. I was a member on this task and finish group, and it would be remiss of me not to recognise former Mayor Jamie Driscoll's input into the work of that group. Who were very passionate and enthusiastic, as you might expect. And I'd like to thank officers for a really excellent piece of work so far. It's given us a really good platform. My plea is that perhaps we should be looking at you spending other people's money as well in respect of this, because if we get people on the trains to work, then there are probably other budgets, and I think if we're smart about thinking outside the traditional silos that we're all very familiar with, we might make that eye-watering number might be less eye-watering.
Yes, Councillor Foulkes.
Hi. We've been through this process. We seem to be being classed in Liverpool City region as one of the best practice in terms of deliverability. But we found the process very clunky, very difficult. Bidding into a central pot takes forever. The announcement was delayed this year. It wasn't a good process. And I think people were mentioning that there's an awful lot of data that we provided as individual organisations. But it's this disjointedness, as I think you were saying. You're spending money on an asset we neither own or control in my silo, and that's quite difficult, but justifiable. So I think we need to maybe talk at the highest level to try and get that process devolved or simpler, with one organisation actually being in charge rather than it being spread out, and maybe a devolved power, something along those lines. But I'm pretty sure the process could be made more open and democratic and more responsive to people. I mean, it's not just about numbers of passengers. Some stations are located in areas of very high elderly population or disability, so it's not simply about numbers. There's lots of other characteristics that need to go into the formula, and I think it needs to be organised, but it needs to be done. I'll finish now, but we've become victim of our own success. We have level platform access, with the new technology on the trains. Well, that's made people say, well, that's all right, but I can't get to this platform to get on this train in the first place. So one thing's laughing at the other. So I think there's a lot of work there. I appreciate the work that's been done. I think this organisation could be a powerful lobby to get more money into that pot.
Yes, and I think you raised an important point about us all joining up as well, isn't it, really? We're all working on this kind of project, local, regionally. Are we really connected in terms of information sharing between ourselves as well?
If I might, Chair, I think there's a couple of points there we can build upon. So I think you're right. 1.3 billion is a big number, and we know the finances. But I think comments have already been made how we can work with our operators, because the operators will be making investment in their assets on an annual basis, and you'll have later the annual business plan process and an opportunity to think about what messages you might want to put there. I think the second one related to that, which you can think about, is we will be working with you as a committee over the coming months with the revision on the outline service specification for both Northern and TP, which is looking a 10-year period ahead. And that outline service specification is your opportunity to talk about what you're looking for in terms of services, but also accessibility, standards, a whole range of things. And there may be an opportunity, as Councillor Foulkes has talked about using the data to shape and inform that service specification. And I think my third point, Chair, would be to say, let's pick up the points that both Councillor Swarbrick and Councillor Foulkes have made about looking at, is there a case to be made for devolving some of the Access for All funding directly to the North and its partners, where you would have an opportunity, as members already said, to use that money alongside money from the private sector, from within the communities, to actually make progress on this. And I think our operators would see that as a benefit as well. So I think the more we can focus on pulling some of those levers that we already have in our gift to make progress on this, then we'll start to see some momentum around that. And I wouldn't rule out also maybe talking with the private sector, and we've had experiences with some of the team involving in getting the supply chain together and working with them so they understand the scale of the opportunity, but also working with us to try and reduce some of the cost prices.
Thank you. And just going on from that, the DFT Accessibility Audit Programme now is completed. Can we have those shared with our individual combined authorities so that we're all on the same page with that? Because that may well change how we view our investment locally as well.
Yes, I've got all the data, so yes, I can share it with anybody who wants it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt, Sheffield.
Thank you very much. I'm Tom Hunt. I'm the leader of Sheffield City Council here representing South Yorkshire today. Endorsed the Quick Wins programme, and I think the recommendation, or the suggestion rather, about requesting that some of the Access for All funding is devolved is a sensible one. I was just going to suggest that I think there's now the key thing here is to make sure that this manifests itself into deliverable schemes, and that's where the detailed work with each of the MCAs is going to be required. And there I think there's opportunities to link up to some of the potential growth plans that some of the MCAs will have. We're looking to expand our tram train network and open up some lines and run tram train services on there. We know that there's going to be accessibility issues there, so I think linking up what we already know about with some of the future opportunities will be important as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Ironimo?
Yeah. Can we just give kind of careful thought to how we communicate some of the improvements that are made to access at stations? So there was a reference earlier to kind of new technologies that might help make places accessible. But if those places have been inaccessible, that information may not reach the people that it needs to. So that was just one point I wanted to raise. The other is, once we identify the list of places, a kind of priority list, it's just to kind of make the point that I think there needs to be a geographical spread. Otherwise, the most densely populated areas will always be the ones that continue to benefit. So just some thought to kind of some geographical spread, as well as the density of the populations that are around the stations that are improved.
I think it goes back to a previous councillor's point about the fact that actually it's about elderly people as well and people with disabilities. So there needs to be, it's not just a commercial business case we're talking about, is it? It's accessibility for all groups and no matter where they live. I think that's the point. Anybody else want to contribute on this item? No. I mean, I think it's important then, I just wonder, obviously the mayors are talking to government at the moment about devolution, about what additional devolution powers we need, and obviously we've got CSR coming up later this year, King's Speech, etc. We need to be quite quick, I would imagine, into making sure this goes in the pots as part of that conversation.
Yeah, we'll certainly take away, if the committee is minded to take the kind of direction, we'll feed that into the work we're doing, we'll share it with the partners individually, and we're having a conversation with the TFN Partnership Board on Wednesday, where we can perhaps think about how we build upon that as part of the input and what we do moving forward to actually make an impact on the ground.
What we need to be careful of, and that's previous points, is the fact that obviously we get our fair share of only devolved pot, of course, on this, because we have our own issues with accessibility and elder people, etc. And need to make sure that the North gets its fair share. Absolutely. That's what I'd just emphasise when it comes to any devolved settlement. And then, yes, if you could share the up-to-date DFT accessibility audits with each of the CAs, I think that'd be helpful, just making sure we're all on the same page when it comes to getting the investment we need.
Okay.
Okay.
So 3 recommendations.
We've got, so we're endorsing the key messages. That sounds all right. Yeah. Agreeing the proposals to take forward work to accelerate delivery. Fine. Endorse the Quick Wins programme. Yes. Are we all happy with that? Sounds eminently sensible.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not seeing a dissenter, so I'll take that as unanimous therefore. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Rail North Partnership Operational Updates, and that's Gary and David to talk on that.
Yeah, Chair, I think we weren't intending to say anything other than to introduce our train operator guests today. So this report just gives you the update on performance, which I think is mixed across the North, as it says, but it also provides updates from each of the operators serving the North in the appendices. Also today, and just to introduce the first speaker, we have one of what is a rotating invitation to train operators that serve the North but aren't under the direction of the Rail North Partnership. So we have today, to kick us off, David Horn from LNER.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to come today and give you an update about LNER. This is the first time we have given this presentation to the committee, so I thought it would be helpful to just take some steps back and just share with you very much the philosophy of the team at LNER. So we came into public ownership 6 years ago, last month, in 2018. We are the long distance operator on the East Coast Main Line, and since the change of ownership we've very much been on a mission to improve and transform the services on the East Coast route on the back of the substantial investment, of course, that there's been in the Azuma trains that we have successfully introduced, but also the infrastructure investment that's been made by Network Rail along the route. We do this because I believe our objectives are very much aligned to the objectives of all of you, which is that we want to see a successful and thriving north of England. We know how important transport is as an enabler to economic growth and indeed to jobs. So all this work, all this effort that we've been making to transform our services is very much in a mind to support the continued growth of the economies that we serve. The East Coast route, in case any of us have forgotten, serves around a third of the UK's population, and the areas that we serve are responsible for around just under 50% of the UK's economic output. So we've got a very important route, and LNER services in themselves generate around £2.8 billion worth of value to the UK economy. One of the things that we set out to do 6 years ago is to work in partnership. With our industry partners, in particular Network Rail, but also our suppliers as well. But we also have put extra emphasis on working in partnership with the authorities along our route, and I'm really proud of some of the progress that has been made and is being made with some notable station investment schemes now underway, including the York Station Gateway scheme, including the Darlington master plan and the new platform and new station buildings now being constructed in Darlington, the improved access at Newcastle, and in particular, of course, of interest to the Chair, the new platform that is now being constructed at Bradford. And I'm very much looking forward to that opening and that enabling the start of additional services between Bradford and London next year. One of the things that we've been able to do is very much take a long-term view of the business. We haven't been restricted by franchise bids or franchise plans. We've very much been able to develop a business plan based around the needs of the business and the needs of our customers. So we have invested in our people, we have invested in training, we have invested in digital technology as well to improve our customers' experience. And that's all been part of the transformation that we've been bringing to the business. And that's really enabled us since COVID to get to a place now where the LNER services are carrying around 24 million passengers a year, which is the most that our business has ever carried on the East Coast route. And we're continuing to see substantial growth in the number of people travelling on our services. But we know there's still plenty of opportunity as well. And one of the challenges that we have is overcrowding. Our services have for some years now been the most overcrowded on the network in terms of the loadings across the day. And in particular at weekends, we've seen substantial growth since COVID, which we've tried to match with some extra capacity. Performance, as we all know, is critical to all of our customers, all of our passengers, and everybody who uses the railway. We have a joint strategy with Network Rail East Coast Route, who have their plans for CP7 to invest in the infrastructure, particularly focusing on making the infrastructure assets more reliable and making the whole network more resilient because of the severe weather and climate change challenges that we are, of course, seeing on the rail network. We're working as well in collaboration with Hitachi to continue to improve the reliability of the Azuma fleet, and indeed with our colleagues at Northern Trains, who maintain our Intercity 225 trains at Neville Hill Depot in Leeds, which operate our West Yorkshire services. A couple of the projects that we've been working with Network Rail on, just to bring this to life a little bit. So we have a project to use more train-borne infrastructure monitoring equipment. This gives Network Rail's engineers an up-to-date and accurate view of any infrastructure defects which might be developing along the route, so that early intervention can take place before we see the infrastructure fail in a way that affects services. And in the context of innovation, some of you may be aware of the Deer Deterrent Scheme, system that we've installed along parts of the route, because deer strikes and animal strikes on the East Coast route have had quite a significant impact over the past 2 to 3 years, where trains hit deer. They have to come out of service for several weeks, and we've got an innovative system that uses sensors and artificial intelligence, and that's been successful at deterring many deer from trespassing, shall we say, on the railway. But there are still plenty of challenges to address when it comes to performance. So for many years now, of course, the local authorities along the route have worked together and admirably to campaign for investment on the East Coast route. The consortium called Invest East Coast has highlighted the importance of continued investment in the East Coast route, and I believe that there's still a very strong case for further investment on the East Coast route. It's some regret that we've had to delay the implementation of the new East Coast timetable, but we're working with all of our industry partners on the final stages of development of that timetable, which is so important because the extra capacity it provides to our customers, addressing some of the overcrowding that we see on our services. The new timetable will provide faster and more frequent services as well, creating more jobs, over 160 new jobs in the north of England for LNER alone, and also, of course, providing taxpayers with a return on the £4 billion worth of investment that's been made by the public over the past 10 years or so. So the timetable has substantial benefits for the north of England as it's intended. It will also enable a number of additional service improvements to be made by other operators who also use the East Coast route. And we're in the, I don't know, you have a meeting after this to discuss progress with that, but we continue to work with everyone involved to ensure that that's a success. In the meantime, we have taken a decision to introduce additional services between York and Newcastle from December to plug some of the gaps that exist in terms of the regional connectivity before the new timetable is introduced. And just last week, the DFT did give us the go-ahead to bid for, as part of the new timetable, that will come in May 25 to bid for the new Bradford to London services. So that is a really good news. Of course, it depends on the platform work being completed, but it looks like everything is now coming together for those services that we have long had the ambition to introduce. So I hope that gives the committee a good positive update in terms of the things that are important to all of us at the current time. Happy, of course, to take questions on any of that or anything else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've checked, and that building work is on time, so you're all right there, David. No problem there. So obviously a really important line for the north and our economies. Any immediate questions for David there? Patrick.
keep forgetting to switch that on. Thank you very much for your presentation. There's two questions I'd like you to sort of address for us. Is just on the East Coast Main Line at the moment, what is the sort of amount of freight that's being used on that line? That's not, I know it's not LNER, but it's an overview of the line that you're using. And what are the sort of implications of what they're also asking for? And can you also give us a bit of an update, please, on your new ticket pricing system? How's it going? What's the time scale for evaluation? And what have been the early sort of problems as far as you've seen, or the advantages as far as you've seen? Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. So in relation to freight, so the East Coast route is used for freight traffic that's worth around 80 million tonnes of freight. So the route is important in relation to freight traffic, and in particular sections of the East Coast route. So around Peterborough, around Doncaster, some of the sort of really busy sections of the route. And there are some, vital freight services that use the route. Now, some of the investment that's taken place over the past decade has been about providing additional capacity for freight services to use the East Coast corridor. So in particular, the investment on the joint line between Peterborough and Doncaster and the Warrington dive under were a couple of really significant schemes. We're talking about around £500 million worth of public investment to create the extra capacity for freight services. And the really important thing is to work out a way of segregating the freight services from the passenger services. So absolutely important. I think there's, we could talk separately maybe in terms of some of the long-term actions that need to be taken to enable the full potential of freight to be gained, particularly thinking about how the freight sector can move to electrification, for example. The East Coast route is important, and the new timetable has been designed with that in mind, so explicit allowance for the freight services as part of the new timetable. In relation to the pricing, so we've done two things in relation to pricing. We've introduced single leg pricing, we've abolished return tickets, and then at the start of this year we introduced what we call simpler fares, which is really a change to the traditional regulation that the industries work to. We have that on trial at the moment between Edinburgh, Newcastle and London. It's early signs, but so far the signs are positive in terms of many thousands of customers choosing our Flex product, which enables people to book a specific train but have the flexibility to move their travel to trains up to 70 minutes either side. That's been getting really positive take-up for people who buy through the LNER website. We've clearly still got work to do in terms of customers who use other third-party websites for their ticketing. So that's one of the things that's coming from our early work. But we haven't really seen any downsides from the empirical evidence through ticket sales so far on the long-distance flows that's been piloted so far. So it does seem to be a step that is working in terms of giving customers a product that they want, but also a simpler structure, tackling some of the complexity that the rail industry has had hitherto with its fare structure.
Councillor Gannon?
Hi, David. I'm not going to bore members, but the issue for me is capacity, you know that, okay? So I'm not going to bore members, we'll be talking about that later. Actually, I would say by and large, I love LNER, genuinely. Always have. I think the service is absolutely fantastic. I do miss the silver service restaurant car, just to put the point in there. You may want to bring it back, but it's an excellent service. My daughter is currently Sussex University, and you know she comes backwards and forwards regularly, and we go down there. It is packed. It's absolutely packed. Okay, and the point that goes through my head is that it's about, you know, it's an excellent service. It's reliable, but it's packed. It's uncomfortable for those people who having to stand. Okay, but it's not just about discomforture. It's about the damage that it's doing to our economy. And it's not just the northeast of England. This is not a constraint that impacts on the northeast of England. You don't get a seat from King's Cross to Northallerton and then you can't get a seat. It's all the way. There's a lack of capacity along the whole length. So we'll come back to that. I just want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that in terms of, you know, from the northeast of England, we're very grateful for the service that provided by LNER and other operators, Lumo as well. Martin sitting there at the back. So, yeah, excellent service. There's just not enough of it.
Sash. Right, okay, and I don't know how Demella is. All right, fine. So, obviously, we're all fans of LNER, and I think we all recognise that it's full, isn't it? And we say that an awful lot of times about rail investment here. We need to keep doing the rail investment because it's so important for our future economy and for your line. If you want to just quickly come back on anything there, and then we'll move on to...
Yeah, we've seen 30% growth since the last timetable change. You know, as an example, we've introduced the Azuma trains, which themselves have added roughly 100 seats to every service, and yet, you know, we've managed to fill them up. You know, I think just highlights the potential of the railway system, and the East Coast route in particular. We've got, you know, and we've still got a big air market between Scotland and London that we ought to be working to get onto the railway as part of the country's net zero plans. So, yeah, this is all about coping with the growth that we're seeing. A nice problem to have.
Indeed. Thank you very much. So, Andy, forgive me, but you're obviously MD of Avanti around the West. Do you want to give an update now?
Thank you, Chair, and good to be here and give an update on Avanti West Coast. So, obviously been at the committee previously, and there's been extensive discussion about operational performance. And I wanted to start by saying absolutely understand how difficult it has been for passengers, our own people and the communities that we serve. And I've apologised previously for historic poor performance, and I'll repeat that apology today. We have worked really hard to address the fundamental issues that have been driving poor performance, and we have made some significant improvements, but we have to carry on to continue to invest and deliver a better service consistently. And Gary Walsh, actually, who's Network Rail Managing Director for West Coast South Route, is actually in the audience today. And I think that's testament to the fact that we're working very closely with Network Rail to address the performance challenges. David spoke from an LNER perspective about joint performance strategies. We have a joint performance strategy with Network Rail. We do, whilst West Coast South is our lead Network Rail route, we actually operate over 4 other Network Rail routes as well, including here in the northwest. So we work very closely with our partners at Network Rail, and our joint performance strategy addresses those things that David talked about in terms of asset reliability. We have plans with our partners at Alstom for fleet improvements. Gary has a plan for particularly the first 60 miles out of Euston, which is absolutely critical for all the destinations that we serve on our network. We also want to make the railway more resilient, recognising some of the challenges we have, not just from weather, but also some of the external factors that affect our delivery. And also when things do go wrong, improving on service recovery as well. And the teams are working closer together than ever in terms of improving service recovery. So we have seen over the last 12 weeks quite a sizable reduction in operator responsible cancellations compared to the final 12 weeks of the previous financial year. And we have continued, as I've talked about before at this committee, that journey of continuing to recruit more drivers. So we're continuing to see a steady increase in the number of productive drivers that we have in our business as a result of the recruitment activity that's been ongoing now for well over 2 years. We've also, from an investment perspective, at the beginning of last month, introduced the first of our Evero fleet, built by Hitachi in the North East. That's a £350 million investment in bi-mode and electric trains that will replace an existing diesel fleet, be able to operate in electric mode when on the electrified network, thereby reducing our carbon footprint, but also ultimately supporting the uplift of the Liverpool service to 2 trains an hour, which is an aspiration that we share jointly with stakeholders on Merseyside. So we are on track to deliver more services. We started to run a few extra services with the June timetable, and by the end of next year we'll be running more than ever. And I think that's really important to put that into context in terms of business growth. The figures for last financial year that the Office of Rail and Road publish showed Avanti as one of the fastest growing train operators year on year, with a 23% uplift. So we carried 33 million customers last year. And we've also had to innovate in terms of our commercial proposition with our unique standard premium offer, which has helped to mitigate the impact of reduced business travel since the pandemic, but also our super fare offer as well, which provides customers with excellent value for money fares if they are able to be flexible with their journey plans. But there are still residual issues in terms of delivering a reliable railway consistently. And whilst we've been able to negotiate some changes to rostering arrangements that have improved staff availability, whilst we've been able to negotiate some changes to annual leave arrangements, which have given us more resilience year round, there are still some other things to do. And we haven't had a mandate to negotiate directly with the trade unions to seek the reset that we really need. So we want to work with government to fix some of those underlying issues at speed to give our customers and the communities that we serve a consistent service all year round. And I'm hopeful that we can now start and work on that reset, recognising that we have to do that in partnership with our trade unions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Andy?
Sorry,
How's it
can
going?
you stand on that then? You haven't been given the mandate to do the reset. Sorry, I just didn't understand what it meant. When you said you hadn't been given the mandate to reset in terms of industrial relations, you're the managers of the organisation. Who do you need a mandate of?
Under the contract that we have with government through the National Rail contract, we need a mandate for pay awards. We need a mandate for any substantive changes to terms and conditions. That's the issue that we are seeking here. So since the start of the Avanti franchise back in December 2019, with the onset of the pandemic and the change to the industry finances and the contracting structure, we've not had a mandate to do that.
Right, thank you.
Again, unless there's any other questions from members, I think I just wanted the Chair to bring to attention that you have on one of the recommendations a question in regards to West Coast. So you've seen in the paperwork that you had a debate, and indeed the main TfN board had a discussion about Avanti's performance in March. The chair of the TfN board wrote jointly with the chair of this committee to the Secretary of State. You will see that we had a response from the department on the 7th of June saying that due to the calling of the election, a substantive response was not possible, inviting TfN to resubmit its advice. You've then got a bit in the paperwork about how things are performing. I think what we would say is, from our perspective, at the time you took the decision previously, is there any substantive change suggesting that the letter isn't appropriate? our advice as your officers, it's not changed, so you should submit it. We would recommend, though, the point that Mr. Mellors has made about infrastructure. It is noticeable that there is a deterioration in infrastructure performance and operation. I personally have been involved in a number of incidents where failures at the southern end of the West Coast has been affecting services to Manchester. So our recommendation to you as a committee is that we do resubmit that letter. Furthermore, our recommendation, if you're so minded, is that we do that this afternoon, because we are aware that the Secretary of State is meeting with Avanti later this week, and we would think it's appropriate the Secretary of State is aware of TFN's perspective.
Well, that sounds eminently sensible. Is everybody okay with that as an approach? I'm seeing nods around the room. Yes, that's fine. If we can action it in that fashion, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Tricia.
Yes, so now Northern, Tricia Williams.
Hi everyone, Trish Williams, Managing Director of Northern, been in post since early May, and very delighted to be here in person and meet committee members. In my role at Northern, prior to this role, I was Chief Operating Officer, so again delighted that Matt Rice, we've been able to take him from Network Rail and appoint him as Chief Operating Officer. There's some points in the report that I'd refer you to have a look at later. Rolling stock. Very positively carrying on with our procurement process. So our aim is to go out to the with an invitation to negotiate later this year. So really pleased with that. The June timetable, structurally that's working really, really well. So again, we're really pleased with that. That will enable us to introduce the Northumberland line and our services that will operate on that later this year, and also allowed us to introduce the Yorkshire Dales Explorer as part of that timetable. My priorities in the role are three things really: people, our own people, our colleagues, and making sure they have good careers in rail and we can make it a more inclusive environment. Transformation and change. Northern is not the finished product. We have a lot to do. We have a big change agenda, and we have to be fantastic change agents in that. So that is another priority. And then purpose for Northern. And really that's all about our customers and ensuring they have a reliable and safe product. Now, I do want at this point just to apologise for the recent performance, particularly with regards to our performance on Sundays in the North West, which frankly have not been good enough. The reason for that is probably twofold. The first is that we don't have Sundays in the working week for any of our train crew in the North West. So that enables conductors, for example, to not make themselves available on a Sunday. They work really, really hard, and some of them frankly don't want to work on a Sunday, and they don't have to. On top of this has been the action short of strike from ASLEF drivers, and it's a bit of a vicious circle there. Because we don't have Sundays in the working week for our drivers on a Sunday, we then don't have any spare capacity or spares in our establishment. And so unfortunately, when a driver is off sick, for example, on a Sunday, we can't backfill them. And it becomes that vicious circle because the train crew get to know that it's going to be a tough Sunday, and then that means that the non-availability actually increases. So in the short term, the aim is to really stabilise the situation with the action short of strike resolved with ASLEF, and that would give us an ability to stabilise, but we do need to do something with our conductors as well, and that is something that we're looking at doing in the very short term. That doesn't give us operational resilience for the long term though, so we're working with our partners in Rail North Partnership to look at what is the reform to make sure that we can operate a resilient service on a Sunday. That's going to take some time to work through with both our own colleagues, the unions and the funders, because this will require investment. But that is our aim. We want to deliver a great 7-day railway. We know that leisure is where we're seeing the growth, and we are suppressing that demand at the moment. So we do believe there's a case there. What we're having to do at the moment is take services out of the Sunday timetable short term. I've resisted doing that permanently at the moment because I do believe we can get to a more stable solution short term, but obviously We do have to look at all options as we go forward, but I'm not looking at doing that on a permanent basis at this moment in time. So two aims, stabilise in the short term and improve that Sunday performance, but we do need to have reform, and we will be working with our partners to really look at the options and the investment case for that.
Thanks, Tricia, for that. I think, Adam, did you want to come in at this point?
Thank you. Yeah, it was just to confirm to committee members that we've issued a breach notice to Northern this morning. They've reached the limits on the TOC on self-cancellations. So now we'll work very closely with Northern on working on a remedial plan for how we get and stabilise that back through. So that so the Railne's Partnership is currently working with Northern on addressing those, and keen to make sure that we get a detailed programme of working activities with some good robust timescales and outcomes and benefits as a result of that.
And is that particularly the Northwest, or is that the whole network?
No, that's the whole network. So we will look structurally at the whole network. As Tricia said, this is, you know, not just about the short term, but that operational resilience. So we will be looking at those. There are a number of individual liner routes that we've identified that obviously you know, could do this improvement as well. We'll work with our Network Rail colleagues because again, you know, we want to widen it to really have that robust plan, how we stabilise that operational performance across the network.
Thank you. I mean, Tricia, obviously you already said it wasn't good enough, wasn't you, in your opening remarks? Councillor Swarbrick.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the admission that it isn't good enough, and I empathise for anybody who's trying to run a business when Sunday doesn't exist. I just think that's an extraordinary state of affairs, and so I can only empathise with that. But I will finish positively by thanking you so much for the Yorkshire Dales Explorer Service reinstatement, and I must catch up with my counterpart from North Yorkshire at the end of the meeting in order we can get our heads together to make that really work for our communities. It's working brilliantly already, and we just need to absolutely make sure that we nail that on.
Thank you, Councillor Swarbrick. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the update and also the frankness and the apology that comes with it. We're not seeing the results of the recovery plan that's been in place, and I think we recognise that the performance is disappointing. I think it's worth noting Adam's point that this is a whole network approach needs to be taken, because whilst the principal root causes may be in the northwest, it has a knock-on further afield. Last Sunday, the 7th of July, 16 out of a planned 27 trains between Sheffield and Manchester were cancelled, so it's not just affecting people in the northwest. The questions I just wanted to ask were, I also understand there's issues around sickness and a higher sickness rate. So how will the current levels of sickness and non-working of rest days have an impact on driver training? And what are the mitigation plans to address reducing staff sickness, volunteer Sundays and the driver training backlog?
So we've made great progress actually with training. So Sheffield now has the lowest training backlog that we've ever known in Northern's history. Liverpool Lime Street, again, we've made fantastic progress. So we are protecting our training throughput despite high levels of sickness and the lack of rest day working available to us. Sickness, we've got a robust plan for those things that are within our control, which we have shared some of that detail in a letter to members prior to this session. We've transferred, for example, from our incumbent occupational health provider to a new occupational health advisor service, and we're already starting to see some benefits of that and the ability to fast track, for example, driver return to work, appointments, etc. And that new contract has enabled us to do that. So more to do, but we have an action plan in place for that.
Thank you. Councillor Foulkes.
Yeah, thanks. On behalf of Mayor Rotherham, I've got a set of figures specific to the Liverpool City region in front of me. I won't bore everyone with the details of them, but they make very grim reading. In some cases, the effect has been that some stations have not received the train for a whole 24 hours. And to us that's unacceptable. The question I've been asked to tease out or ask is there anything unique to the city region part of the network that is making it as bad, or perhaps the question may have been answered that it's bad everywhere, but is there anything in the city region area that we can assist with or that we can work together on to improve, because the figures are getting pretty awful, to be frankly honest?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the offer, and we may well pick up with that separately. What we were trying to do initially, as a result of the high levels of unavailability on a Sunday, so it will be Sundays where you see that 24 hours without a service, is we were trying to spread our train crew that were available very, very thinly. That frankly didn't work. It didn't help our customers plan routes, and that caused more problems. So what we have done is targeted routes to take out the services, to give customer certainty. It might not be good news, but at least they know what is happening on their route. So we've tried to protect routes where we know there's higher footfall, where we know there are events, for example, and it will actually have a knock-on effect on the east side of the region. I'm well aware of that as we team and ladle services. So there may well be something we can look at to reduce the impact, but what we won't want to go back to is spreading it too thin and making sure that our customers do have some certainty.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gannon.
Yes, I mean, I appreciate that train operating companies are extremely complex, huge organisations. And I wouldn't pretend to try and understand the complexities of the industrial relations framework. Our practice as a trade union official for 25 years, but not in railways, okay? So, but it seems to me that when I sit through these meetings, I seem to hear a consistent thing. High levels of sickness, you know, refusal to work, resting days. We haven't got a mandate, okay? And I accept, Tricia, in your particular case, you wouldn't have been there since May. But is there not some responsibility on the operating companies? You know, senior executives who are well paid to anticipate the level of demand that's going to be required and to ensure that they're recruiting sufficient workforce, training them, and making sure that they have reasonable terms and conditions to make that system operate. Now, I accept that's a simplistic view. I accept I don't understand all the complexities, and they're hugely complex organisations to run. But that's the responsibility you're being charged with.
Totally agree. We do have enough.
Sorry,
we do have enough drivers, so that is absolutely a big part of what we do. Have to have enough train crew. We have to have a good training throughput to make sure that we can use our drivers and our conductors. I think the issue with regard to reform is probably we're probably as frustrated as our customers may well be with where we've got to with that. So I'm very hopeful that we can have a look at what that looks like now. Very willing to work with the government on that because frankly we've not been able to get around the table to talk about some of those issues in the very recent past.
Thank you, Tricia. I think, David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points, because from the Rail North Partnership Board's point of view, which we represent you on, this is something we've spent quite a lot of time over the last few months and done some deep dives into. And it's fair to say some of these issues have been around for many years, since May 18 actually. I can see the frustration from members. I think the point Adam made about this breach notice is it puts it on a more formal footing in terms of the recovery plan. I think it's really important that we see that plan in full, and that's what we said at the board, and we see all the aspects of it. Some of these are short-term fixes, some of them are much more fundamental rail reform points, but I think it's really important that we see that plan in full with all the things that may or may not need mandates for or can be done locally, and we give you as committee members the opportunity to see that in a way that we took you through the TransPennine plan a year or so ago, and I think people really valued that. So that's what I'd propose, that we work with Tricia and the team to arrange a briefing session where we can take you through that plan, so you can have confidence at least that the plan addresses all the issues and will make a real impact on passengers.
Thank you. And how quickly can the plan be put together, I suppose, is a question.
I'd look to Adam on the timing of that in terms of the formal process, but I'd like to do that briefing within the next 4 weeks.
Yes, so I've got discussions this week with Matt Rice, Chief Operating Officer, to set out that timeline, because obviously it's reliant on them to be able to create that robust plan. So happy to feedback offline about the timescales for that.
Okay, so it sounds like 4 weeks. Is that okay with you, Tricia? Is that?
Yeah, I think there's...
And I think it's important when that plan comes, just to give us clear choices as well about what's possible, what's not possible. So, you know, to make it all transparent for committee members would be really helpful for that.
Apologies, I didn't have my microphone on, but yes, we will have the ability to share what that plan looks like.
Sort of in front. Thank you. You know, it's a point I was going to make from discussions that we've had with Matt and Tricia, that I think the value in the sort of plan that we're talking about here is, we know that Northern has already tried, as TPE did at the time, everything that's obvious to look to get back to a figure that's acceptable. But what becomes very difficult to do is to track just exactly what initiatives and what investments are going to bring what improvement in performance. And I think one of the things that, whilst we will get something high level and as you say, ambitious, Tricia, early, and none of that will be wrong, but what will really drive performance improvements that you can rely on is the sort of stuff that Chris has had the opportunity to do, which is just to look at what is it that unlocks what benefit, and then tying ourselves to that in a way that lets us track where we expect to be month by month and initiative by initiative, which is how you get out from under, in my experience, having done the same in ScotRail, as opposed to just working really hard. I think one of the dangers we've discussed with Northern is that the effort to run a Sunday at the moment is taking all of the energy of the operator from a Tuesday or Wednesday onwards, and you don't get past a real performance problem from that perspective. And so I think the guys are offering to do exactly the right thing, and it will be worth taking the time to do that in detail.
So we're in danger of writing the plan here, so let's not do that. So, sorry?
Sorry.
Okay, so and obviously there are casualties from some of this. If there's some extra capacity there that's not being used because you can't run it properly, you know, I mean, I've got in my notes about, you know, the Belden Ilkley service has been reduced, and we seem to have a real problem with the York Sheffield service, which I'm a bit concerned about. And if we're losing those services because things aren't running properly, then that is a real sacrifice of the network, which I don't want to make. So if we can sort of make sure that any decisions about routes are put into that plan, so they're not just casualties and set aside just to make sure the plan works now. Let's put it all in the round, I would say, and make sure we can see everything that's in the frame for decision making in the plan and how it's executed. Anything else we've missed in that?
No.
No? Okay. So lots of work to be done there. Chris Jackson, TP, you've been through this. You can probably mentor Tricia.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, Chris Jackson, Managing Director, TransPennine Express. Firstly, I'd like to offer my congratulations to committee members who were newly elected or re-elected in the elections. And we look forward to working with you, really, working with you closely so we can improve rail for the communities that we serve. Now, I had the pleasure of actually having Mayor Scaith in the cab with me from Leeds to Manchester this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'd just like to extend that offer. I'd like to extend that offer to any committee member who fancies seeing the TransPennine route upgrade in action. That's a massive £11 billion programme, the second biggest programme in the UK, biggest in the north of England, and it's going to transform travel across the north. So that invites there. Just drop me a note afterwards if you're interested. So I'm going to keep this quite brief, actually, Chair. It's just over a year since TP was brought into the management of Directly Operated Holdings Limited, so we're part of the family of South Eastern, LNER and Northern. The business is definitely in a very different place now to where we were this time last year. So colleague engagement, stakeholder satisfaction, both up by 40%. We've stabilised the operation, cancellations have been substantially reduced, and P codes, which you will remember, have all but disappeared. We've also made some excellent progress reducing our driver training backlog. And that allowed us to reintroduce some of our services in June, and we'll be reinstating services. I committed to committee that we would do that in December of this year. We're on track to do that, and what that will give is 4 fast trains an hour between Leeds and Manchester, leaving at very memorable times at 00, 15, 30 and 45. And the headline is that will give 12% increase in the number of seats, or 1,300 additional seats per day across the network. We've also issued our invitation to negotiate. We can talk about this now because we're out of pre-election. That's for 29 brand new trains. So we're just waiting to see what the market response is from that. And we still recognise we've got a lot to do, but we've got a plan. And as you'll see in the paperwork, we're delivering solidly against that plan. Customer complaints are at their lowest ever levels, and Net Promoter Score sits at plus 12. I'm also looking forward to meeting the Secretary of State on Wednesday morning to set out our plans for the future and to discuss some of the areas which will require some DFT support to improve things even more for our customers. And that's it from me. I'm more than happy to take any questions at your discretion, Chair.
Thank you. So part of the recovery plan was you putting stuff in place as quickly as possible and getting back to where we need to be. I mean, are we able to accelerate that a little bit further now, or because I've still got in my notes some services that are still not quite back to where they were. Looking at York, Manchester, York, Castleford, Wakefield, Huddersfield, Manchester service.
It's a good question, Chair. If you remember, we did make the difficult decision to temporarily step back the timetable in December 23. That gave us the headroom that we needed to clear the backlog of driver training. We set ourselves with committee's agreement a number of tests. We passed some of those tests, which allowed us to reintroduce some services in June, but there is no way of introducing any additional services between now and December. We still need the remainder of this year to clear the outstanding driver training. What we are doing, however, and you may well have seen it in local publications, we're doing it for the Edinburgh Fringe, for example, we did it for the Taylor Swift concerts, where we do have resources. We are providing late night additional services to support the late night economies, and particularly big gigs that are happening around the north and Scotland, Edinburgh Fringe being the latest.
Great if you're a Taylor Swift fan. But just thinking, it will be good, obviously December's not that far away, it'd be good to know what actually are we going to get in December. So I think that's something, just some reassurance about what does back to normal look like in December.
Chair, that's absolutely fine. We will communicate that. As I mentioned, there's a big uplift in the number of seats that will be available per day. In terms of the fast services, will be reintroduced for an hour between Leeds and Manchester. Connectivity between Scarborough and Manchester, as opposed to just running those shuttles to York. Lots of improvements. Probably too many for me to list now. I can share all that detail with you soon.
It's particularly the timetable that we're going to get really from December, I think, in terms of which services we're going to have. Because I say, this is what happens when we have recovery plans. You know, people say, oh, we're not doing that for now, then it never comes back again, and we can't have that. So it's just some reassurance that those services that we've all been sort of doing without, because, you know, we understand what's happening, we are going to actually get them back in full as we have before. Any further questions of Chris Jackson, TP? I'm not seeing anything there.
So on this paper, Chair, you've been ticking off the recommendations at the front of the paper quite nicely as you've gone through. The one that's left outstanding is the draft response to open access applications. Now, just to be clear, this is not saying or not asking you to take a view about individual applications. It's not asking you to take a view about the rights or wrongs on open access operators or additional rights. What it is saying is we are aware that there are additional access rights being sought on both the West Coast and the East Coast main line. You have heard today how we've got challenges with the infrastructure on the West Coast. Indeed, there are 3 notices published last week by Network Rail as cited as early warnings of congested infrastructure. We have also had a notice published of early warning of congested infrastructure on the East Coast main line. And I think, Chair, my view is it was struggling to understand why, when we've got problems on the infrastructure already, there is a process where congested infrastructure is then having additional emphasis being put on it. And I'm mindful of the East Coast main line, where we haven't yet resolved whether it is possible to solve the problems, and some compromises are being made. So the recommendation and the draft letter you have in the papers is simply to kind of say to the processes that are in train, can we just pause for a moment on these while we understand what the actual state of play on both the West Coast and the East Coast is, and don't let's get ourselves into even more difficulty by adding in additional rights when at the moment we know we're struggling with what we've got. That's the recommendation, and you have a copy of the draft letter in the pack.
Okay. What are we pausing, sorry?
The industry has, the Office of Rail and Road issued a general notice to all operators saying if you had any proposals that you wanted to make for additional rights over the next 18 months to publish those and to sort of bring those forward. So they are going through the process whereby Network Rail are responding initially, and then the Office of Road and Rail will be responding and considering the applications. And I think given where we are in terms of infrastructure, a view from this committee would be helpful in just saying we've got problems. Before we start adding to them, can we just work through the current problems?
So the only one I'd make an exemption to that was actually my Foster Square railway station lines by 2025, because otherwise it'd be too late. Sorry, Councillor Folkes.
My point's maybe similar to yours, Chair, that there is offers not mentioned in the letter that should be included. Particularly the Avanti West Coast offer from extra services from Liverpool to London. We don't know what response the letter is going to be with. It seems like we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we should include all those schemes that are listed. I understand the capacity issues will be decided elsewhere, but if that offer remains after the consultation, then I'd want that specifically mentioned.
Yeah, if it helps, I think there are a number of these sort of challenges. That's clearly one of them. But there are also services that are in effect suppressed, and Central Manchester is a good example of that, where we have reluctantly agreed to take some services out through Central Manchester to create the space to allow services to run more reliably. Yet they might be filled by some other services. So. And it's not saying no, it's just saying we need to kind of understand that the things we have said and you have said you want back can run in the future. Same on East Coast, where if you know there is this original commitment for 2 trains an hour east-west from TransPennine that aren't currently running, we need to understand how they can be brought back into the equation. So I think it's a question of just taking a balanced approach and step back here.
So that to me, it sounds like common sense really. It's like, it's not, we shouldn't be freezing new services. We should be just saying, well, this is a slot in the timetable that obviously is temporarily not there, so it needs to be put back in future. I mean, it just sounds common sense that you'd leave a placeholder there and not fill it with something else. I don't really understand that. So I don't know why I have to write a letter stating the actual obvious. I mean, perhaps that's me just... Sorry, Tom, did you want to come in? I'm not sure you're indicating.
I was interested in the response to that, but I was just going to say there's also Sheffield to King's Cross via Woodhouse, which is another service that's being proposed. So I think in this, if we're sort of adding other ones in, it might just be worth noting that there's the ones mentioned here, but there are others as well. And so, you know, we're supportive of that, but also supportive with the thrust of the letter. So perhaps a reference to that would be helpful.
We're not sure about your letter.
The easiest way to explain it is the process that the ORR go through is very different and separate from the processes you will talk about. So we will sit around this table, we will understand what are your priorities, we will work with Rail North Partnership to see what you were looking for in terms of service specification going into those contracts. Meanwhile, almost as a separate conversation, the Office of Road and Rail considers whether or not a request for additional rights on a particular route can actually go through. So you get a situation where you don't necessarily have the objectives of ORRs being lined up with what you're looking for. Again, this is perhaps a hint as to why we need rail reform about the use of allocation of resources and paths. If I might just pick up on Councillor Folkes' point about the services to Liverpool, I think the point that's being made is there are some existing contractual commitments, and I think that's the message I'm hearing from, is where there are existing contractual commitments which have not yet been met, to make sure we don't lose those. But I just, like others sat around the table, sit when we're talking about what do we do with the East Coast, when the message is we're having to make compromises. Services will not be able to run because we haven't got enough capacity, while we are then putting on additional services through a separate independent process. So the letter is about trying to join those processes up and saying, let's take one view of the future of the East Coast, let's take one view of the future of the West Coast.
So before we send it, can we just check with each of the combined authorities that they're happy with the list of routes that are there? Because I just think we do not want to, obviously we've all been pushing for additional services, sometimes for 10, 15 years. We don't want to suddenly send a letter saying like, none of that.
That's fine.
So I think that's what we're all concerned about. We understand the not filling a route when it's meant to be for something else and has been and needs to be put back, get that. But let's just be really careful about a blanket approach. Is Councillor Fulk?
Yeah, but surely the issue is that most of the offers that are in are desirable or would be welcome if the capacity was there. And that's the tenor of the letter. So we mentioned the schemes on block and then prefaces say, but none of them, all or some of them or none of them will be deliverable unless capacity increases. That's the tone of the letter. So then no region feels left out or missing. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, fine. So we can just do a round robin again to the combined authorities and make sure they're happy with the letter and the routes that are mentioned in the letter. Then I think we'd all be more confident.
Okay.
Okay, fine.
Sorry.
Also, can I say one
Yeah, just in terms of the tone of the letter, I think it's important to make sure that the open access operators feel that they are welcomed, that they play an important part. I know Hull Trains for us has been kind of transformational in the services that it offers. So we can just make sure that tone is right, please.
No, indeed. Okay. Lovely. Anything else? No? Super. So we've obviously got other operators who are mentioned in the paper, but unless there's any questions specifically to those, I'll take those as read.
It's just to say, Chair, that we have got, as David mentioned at the opening, we've got a rotation of whereby a number of the other operators will be invited to come along, as David Horn was on behalf of LNER. So you will see those other operators over time come before you at the table.
So everybody gets that pleasure. That's nice. Lovely. Okay, well, in that case, let's move on to the next item, which is Train Operating Company's Annual Business Plans 25-26. I'm looking at Caroline.
That's me. Hello and thank you everyone. I hope you've all read the report. For new members of the committee, we have to go through the annual business planning process with train operators every year. So it just seems strange that we've just finished the process for the current financial year and we're starting it now for next financial year. So we're talking about next financial year. We are in a unique position in the North with our relationship with Ranulph Partnership and DFT, and that we get to directly input into the process with Northern and TPE. So it is a privileged and unique position to be in. All train operators go through an annual business planning process, apart from some exceptions such as Merseyrail and Tyne and Wear Metro. So the process, as we've heard from other operators, is a pretty standard one. This year, as usual, we've taken a three-pronged approach. So, first of all, we've developed some priorities with our lead rail officers, members of Officer Reference Group ORG. We've had a couple of bites at the cherry because the initial rental committee meeting in June was postponed because of the elections. We've had a couple of goes at drafting the priorities. So that's what we're talking about today. The final specification for the train operation business plan, so the request for business plan as it's called, will be issued to operators in September. And so we'll be able to include the priorities we discussed today. And then obviously the business plans will be finalised towards the end of this year. We'll have an opportunity to review the drafts and then come back to committee with some propositions and ideas and feedback. And part of that is we will reinstate the Ranulph Committee working group on TOC business plans that I know yourself, Councillor Hinchcliffe, is a member of as well, to discuss any finer details. The priorities, as I say, have been developed with ORG. We've tried this year to be pragmatic. While we want to be ambitious with what we asked operators to provide as part of their business plan, we do need to be pragmatic in that we do estimate that the financial constraints that we've had this financial year will apply next financial year as well. So clearly we don't want to set our operators up to fail by asking them to do some things that they just can't do. But we also do need to be mindful that business train operators under operator of last resort do look at a 5-year horizon. Renworth Partnership and TFN are working on a 10-year re-specification. So we do need to be mindful that the annual business plan for next financial year is a stepping stone that will take us to those 5-year horizons and take us to the 10-year specification. I've kept it to 5 priorities this year rather than a really long list. We've tried to remove, where possible, the things we class as business as usual. So you won't see any reference in there to working on the future ESG on East Coast Main Line, because that really is business as usual. But you will see in there, as part of the priorities, working with the Task and Finish group on rail accessibility, looking at planned journey disruptions, so taking the best and the worst of what we're learning from the TRU upgrade, changing markets and new economies, sorry, and things such as trying to work towards more of a 7-day railway, which we've heard from our operators it's going to be really difficult because of the current terms and conditions, but it's something we want to work towards. And equally, we've got in there the training academy for the North. I will leave that with you if you've got any more questions.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that. I mean, when would, obviously it's going through the working group, you said. When would it come back here to this board?
What, the outputs of the working group?
Well, when we're further to concluding the contractual arrangements.
That
Sorry. Usually, in terms of the final business plan, it would come in the January meeting with the working group getting to see it hopefully in December or January. So that's what time.
If it's the same process as last year, we came to the February Renworth Committee, but we had a Task and Finish group in the January to go through what we were going to take to committee in the February.
Okay, and will the combined authorities be involved in it at some point as well as us? Because obviously they're around the table with you in discussing this, are they?
Yeah, so part of the process is we had a workshop in June with a member of each, what we call quadrants, but there's only 3 of them, so they're sort of business units, and the members fed in to the Leeds, and we met in Leeds and actually had a workshop with TPE, with Northern, with Passenger Focus, with Network Rail, and obviously Renworth Partnership. To start, that was more detailed.
Yeah. I'm just keen for everybody to be aware of what's going, because this is a long-term thing, isn't it, really? So we want to try and get it right.
Yeah.
I think what comes up again and again in all these conversations is rolling stock, and I think I've mentioned before at this board that really we should have a sort of a joint strategy for across the north about rolling stock, and obviously we hear that we might not be trained up on the right trains or whatever, and therefore it's all right going and procuring things, but are they actually going to be right for the whole of the north? And I think that's something that I have asked before, if we could think about as an agenda item at this board.
If I can say, Chair, I think we picked up earlier about the work that started on the rebasing of the outline service specification, and that will include some comments about rolling stock as well. So that's your in, because that work is underway. So we will take that away and make sure we pull one out in more detail.
Because I'm not convinced that some of these services go because we haven't got the right rolling stock or etc. Okay. Any questions for Caroline, Tom?
Not a question, just to say I have to leave the meeting slightly early, I'm afraid, but I do support this recommendation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Caroline? No? Lovely. In that case, I think we're happy with the recommendations by the sounds of it.
So that was about priorities.
The strategic priorities. We like the strategic priorities.
And it's about encouraging the 5-year approach.
And the 5-year approach in the context of a 10-year service specification. Is everybody happy with that? Lovely. Thank you very much. So I think that is that now for the actual public elements of the meeting. Next meeting will be on the 3rd of September, 10:30. But we're now going to the exclusion of press and public for the private minutes of the previous meeting and just further discussion. So do you need me to read this out?
I need you to say you're moving
the wording. I am moving the wording to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of items 10 on the agenda and all the 1 and 2 that is from that. Can I see all those in favour, please show?
Okay.
Thank you very much. So people can leave if they're not part of the meeting. That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance, everybody. Thank you, operators, for your attendance.